Your mind doesn't sabotage you at the wrong times. Your mind sabotages you precisely when you need it most, when the prize is in front of you. When years of hard work are finally paying off, when the moment has arrived and you're there, ready, trained, prepared, and then that voice begins, you're going to fail again. And what makes that voice so devastating isn't the volume at which that voice screams. It's because that voice knows your name. In 1974, psychologist Timothy Galway published a book called The Inner Game of Tennis. After observing hundreds of elite athletes making the same mistake, not a technical error, a mental error, he realized that the more consciously the athlete thought about their own movement, the more they tried to control their mind, the worse their performance was. The most dangerous opponent wasn't on the other side of the net. It was inside the player's head. Decades later, neuroscience confirmed what Galway intuited. The human brain has two operating systems that frequently conflict. One acts, the other narrates, and when the narrator takes control, the agent freezes. Japanese warriors of the 17th century did not have access to neuroscience, but they understood this conflict with a precision that modern science is articulating today. And they built an entire system to solve it. And I want to explain this to you through the story of a young man named Gabriel. Gabriel's name will not appear in history books, but his story begins the same way as that of every athlete who was lost to himself before losing to his opponent. Gabriel was 19 years old when the call-up to the university team arrived. 18 months of double training, days of ice on his joints and ice on his head. He was the type of athlete who didn't need to be reminded to train. He needed to be reminded to stop. But when the final arrived, Gabriel left his own body. He describes it this way: it was like watching himself from the outside. The movements he executed with automatic precision suddenly required conscious instruction. And the conscious instruction came late. Always late, he lost, and the following years were spent trying to understand why. Perhaps you're experiencing the same thing Gabriel did. Perhaps you've spent months or years dedicating yourself to a project, a promotion at work, a company, an exam. But when the most important moment arrived, you simply froze. If this has ever happened to you, know that you are not alone. Let's understand together why this happens and what the samurai method is to overcome it. Now I invite you to subscribe to the channel, because every week I bring content and analyses like this, which delve into the problems of our society through the lens of Eastern philosophies and neuroscience. Also, leave a like and a comment on the video. This helps the channel reach more people. Thank you so much for your attention and for the support of all the subscribers and channel members who are always here following us. Now let's get to the video. Chapter 1, The Pattern That Doesn't Change Address. Gabriel was 24 years old when he decided that his life as an athlete had come to an end. It wasn't a dramatic decision. It was erosion, an injury that took too long to heal, a call-up that never came. A morning when he woke up and realized that the 5 a.m. training had become an obligation, not a calling, and that the difference between the two is everything. He moved from Portland to Austin. He started working at a friend's tech startup. He learned quickly. He had vision. He had energy. And 3 years later, he had his own business, a small sports consulting firm that sold performance analysis software to gyms and amateur clubs. The model made sense. The product worked. The first customers converted well, and then came the presentation that would change everything. A group of investors from Dallas wanted to see the pitch. It wasn't a casual meeting. It was the kind of opportunity that comes along once, and Gabriel knew it. He prepared each slide for weeks. He rehearsed each transition. He knew the numbers by heart. On the morning of the presentation, he was in the building's elevator when his voice returned. The same voice from the university final, with the same tone. With the same surgical timing. You're not a real businessman. You're a failed athlete trying to pretend you know what you're doing. Gabriel entered the room. He opened his laptop. He began his presentation and it froze, not completely. No one in the room noticed that something had broken inside. But he did. The pauses were too long. The answers to the questions came a few seconds late, the exact time it takes for the internal narrator to interrupt the agent and take control. The investors thanked them politely. They said they would get in touch. They didn't come in. That night, Gabriel sat at his empty office desk staring at the ceiling for a few minutes. Those were minutes of self-discovery. He had seen that before. In the arena, on the court, in training sessions that went well, and in competitions that went badly. Always the same structure, always the same mechanism. The environment changed, but the problem didn't change address. And it was this realization, not defeat but the recognition of the pattern, that led Gabriel down a path he had never considered. If the problem wasn't technical, then the solution couldn't be either. He began to study the mind. He didn't start by studying self-help or how to be more motivated. He started with neuroscience, cognitive psychology, philosophy. He needed to understand the mechanism before he could break it. And what he found in the first few months of reading was disturbing in its precision. The human brain wasn't built for truth. It was built for survival, and these two things are often opposites. Chapter 2, Why the Brain Lies to You. Gabriel came across the work of neuroscientist Antonio Damasio one Tuesday afternoon. Damasio spent decades studying patients with damage to specific brain regions, specifically patients who lost the ability to process emotions after lesions in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. The initial hypothesis was that, without emotions disrupting judgment, these people would make more rational decisions. What Damasio discovered was the opposite. Without emotional access, these patients were incapable of making any decisions. They could analyze options indefinitely, list pros and cons with mathematical precision, and never choose. Because choice doesn't come from pure logic. It comes from an integrated system where thought and feeling are the same process, not separate processes. Gabriel reread the paragraph 3 times because he had spent years trying to control his mind and suppress his nervousness before competitions, as if thinking and feeling were enemies, and as if victory belonged to whoever could silence one side. But Damasio showed that this was not only inefficient, it was neurologically impossible. You don't control the mind by suppressing the body. You fragment it. There was more. The brain operates based on prediction, not perception. At any given moment, the brain isn't processing reality as it is. It's comparing what's happening with what it predicted would happen, and updating the model when the prediction fails. What you experience as seeing the world is, most of the time, seeing the model that the brain has constructed of the world. This means that an athlete who always loses when the game gets tough isn't simply afraid of the pressure. Their brain has built a predictive model that says high-pressure situations end in failure, and when high-pressure situations arise, the brain doesn't wait for the data. It activates the model first automatically, before conscious logic can intervene. The voice in the elevator wasn't a sign of weakness of character. It was the predictive model fulfilling its function with perfect efficiency. Gabriel remained silent about this understanding for a few days, because understanding the problem is different from solving it. And neuroscience tells us what happens. It doesn't tell us what to do. It was in a feudal history book about Japan, bought by accident while searching for another title in a used bookstore in Austin, that Gabriel found the first piece of the solution. He didn't find the solution in an online course offered by a salesperson. He found it in a used bookstore. The irony did not escape him. The book described the training practices of the Yagyu clan warriors during the Edo period, and there was a paragraph that Gabriel underlined, photographed, and kept as his phone's wallpaper for months. The masters of the Yagyu clan didn't train their apprentices to be courageous. They trained them to eliminate the fear of the unknown. And the method they used wasn't emotional hardening or suppression of feeling. It was the daily and systematic contemplation of one's own death. Shi no Meisō. Chapter 3. The meditation that samurai used to stop lying to themselves. The Hagakure. It is a book that was written between 1709 and 1716 by Yamamoto Tsunetomo, first samurai of the Nabeshima clan, who spent the last years of his life dictating his teachings to a young warrior named Tashiro Tsurumoto. The most quoted sentence in the book is also the most misunderstood. The path of the samurai is found in death. When faced with two choices, life and death, simply choose death. A superficial reading reveals nihilism, or martial fanaticism, or a culture that glorified sacrifice, but Yamamoto wasn't talking about wanting to die. I was talking about what happens to the mind when you stop pretending you have unlimited time. The mechanism is precise. The human brain is capable of tolerating an extraordinary amount of self-deception because it operates under the implicit assumption that there will be time to correct course tomorrow. You know you're avoiding the difficult conversation, but there's a tomorrow. You know you're running away from the decision that needs to be made, but there's next week. Self-deception survives in the space created by the illusion of infinite time. When we are deceived by this mechanism, we constantly postpone important decisions and actions because we believe that tomorrow will be different. Many people think, I didn't study today, but I'll study tomorrow. I didn't follow the diet today, but I'll start next week. I didn't train today, but I'll train starting Monday. And in this way, we keep pushing all the deadlines forward, always to tomorrow. Shino Meisō move this space, not as an exercise in despair, as an exercise in clarity. The samurai who meditated on his own death every morning wasn't cultivating melancholy. He was training his brain to operate without the anesthesia of later, and without that anesthesia, the mind stops constructing protective narratives, because protection no longer makes sense when you've accepted that time is finite and that the present moment is the only one that exists with certainty. It took Gabriel weeks to understand what Yamamoto was really describing, because the first reaction was resistance. He didn't want to think that one day he would cease to exist. Nobody wants to. The brain, which was built for survival, treats this contemplation as a threat and activates precisely the evasion mechanisms that Shino Meisō aims to dissolve. But Gabriel was a serious student, and he continued. He started with something small. Every morning, before turning on his computer, before checking emails, before anything else, he would sit in silence for 3 minutes, pondering a single question. If today were my last day, what would I be avoiding? This thought was not a motivational metaphor. It was a real question, directed at a real mind. The first few days produced nothing. My mind resisted. I changed the subject. I remembered pending tasks. I made noise. In the second week, Gabriel was sitting with the question when he realized there was a call he had been putting off for 3 weeks. An important client who had sent emails that Gabriel had read but not responded to. The worst part was that Gabriel hadn't forgotten. He did it out of avoidance, because the conversation would be difficult, and there was always a better reason to have it tomorrow. If today were my last day, what would I be avoiding? This connection. He called that morning. The conversation was difficult and necessary, and it ended well, better than any version he had constructed in his head during 3 weeks of procrastination. This wasn't about the connection. It was about the pattern of evasion that the mind creates when it operates under the assumption of infinite time. And Gabriel recognized the pattern immediately, because it was the same pattern that appeared before the competitions, the same tendency to construct protective narratives instead of acting with clarity. Shu no Meisō. It doesn't teach you not to be afraid. It teaches you to see fear with enough precision not to be ruled by it. But there was a second layer that Gabriel had not yet reached, because understanding the problem, even with surgical clarity, wasn't enough if the mind continued to generate noise during the moment of action. Zai no Meisō cleans the mirror, but the samurai still needed something for the moment when the blade was in motion. And it was there that Gabriel encountered the second concept. Chapter 4, Zanshin, the consciousness that remains. There's a mistake that almost every Westerner makes when reading about Japanese martial arts. The mistake is thinking that the goal of training is to eliminate the thought. Mushin's mind without a mind. Zanshin, residual consciousness. These terms are often interpreted as the ideal of a completely empty mind, without content, operating purely on autopilot. But the masters who developed these concepts described something different. As I've explained in several videos on this channel, the main point of these concepts isn't to stop thinking, but to not be dominated by thoughts and emotions. It's about having clarity about your goals and the actions you need to take. Dakuan Soho was a 17th century Zen monk who some believe corresponded with Miyamoto. Musashi and wrote a treatise called Fudoshi Shin Myoroku, the unchanging record of divine wisdom, specifically concerning the relationship between mind and sword. Dakuan described the warrior's central problem not as excessive thinking, but as a fixation on thought. When you confront the enemy, if you think, "I'm going to cut the enemy down," your spirit becomes trapped in that intention and your movements become slow. If you don't think anything, the sword cuts by itself. The distinction is fundamental. It is not absence of mind. It is an unfixed mind, a mind that moves with the moment instead of fixing itself on one point and freezing. Zanshin is the most visible form of this quality. The word combines I will, which means to remain, to continue, with shin, which is mind, heart, essence. Literally, the mind that remains present after the action has ended. In martial arts, Zanshin is the state the practitioner maintains after the strike or technique. It's when the practitioner maintains continuous presence, as if the action had never been separated from what comes after it. To the untrained eye, it appears as immobility. To those who understand, it's the opposite. It's movement that never stopped. Gabriel took some time to translate that into the context of his life. Why Zanshin in a business presentation? It doesn't look like Zanshin in a sword duel, but the mechanism is identical. Gabriel's problem with presentations wasn't that he overthought them. It was that after each answer, each slide advanced, each pause, he would let his attention wander, evaluating what he had just said, constructing a narrative about how investors had received it, entering a loop of retrospective analysis that lasted long enough to create a noticeable gap in the next sentence. The inner voice didn't appear as a continuous monologue. It appeared as a series of micro-interruptions between the action and the continuation of the action. Zanshin needs training to eliminate those micro-interruptions, not by silencing the mind, by refusing to let attention fixate on the immediate past while the present is still happening. Gabriel began to practice this in concrete ways. During conversations, instead of mentally evaluating what he had just said while the other person was speaking, he trained himself to maintain complete attention on what was being said now. During smaller presentations, to existing clients, to team meetings, he practiced not letting go of consciousness after each block of speaking. He maintained the same state of attention before, during, and after each segment. At first, it seemed artificial, performative. But there was something more fundamental that he hadn't yet touched upon, something that lay beneath so much of it. Shi no Meisō, how much of Zanshin? A premise that all of Japanese philosophy seemed to assume to be true, and which the Western world had decided at some point in history was irrelevant. Chapter 5, Kokoro. The word that English doesn't have. No European language has a word equivalent to Japanese. Kokoro, this is not a linguistic coincidence. It's a philosophical divergence. Kokoro is sometimes translated as mind, sometimes as heart, and sometimes as spirit, depending on the context. But none of these translations captures what the word truly names, because what it names is the refusal to separate these three things. For Japanese tradition, and for Zen Buddhism, which shaped samurai culture, thinking and feeling are not distinct processes that occur in different parts of the human being. They are expressions of the same process. Kokoro, that's the name of this unique process. The word first appears in Japanese texts from the 8th century. It is present in Manyoshu, the oldest anthology of Japanese poetry. It is at the core of Bushido, the samurai code of conduct. It's in Musashi, in Takuan, in all the formative texts of the warrior tradition, and in all these contexts, Kokoro. It carries the same implication. A divided warrior who thinks one thing, feels another, and acts a third is not a dangerous warrior. He is a dead warrior waiting to become one. The unit of Kokoro. It's not an abstract spiritual ideal. It's a functional requirement for survival. Gabriel found this after months of applying Shi no Meisō and Zanshin, and he felt that he was getting close to something, but that there was a layer that was not yet accessible. Why Shi no Meisō? It provided clarity before the action. Zanshin he was present during and after. But there was a moment, the exact moment of entering the game, the first second of a performance, the instant the referee blows the whistle, when something still held him back. And he realized it while reading about Kokoro, who knew exactly what that blockage was. It was the crack, the chasm between what he thought he should feel, confidence, clarity, control, and what he actually felt, tension, doubt, the voice, and the attempt to fill that chasm with willpower, to suppress what he felt in order to act as he should, was precisely what created the paralysis. Kokoro, It doesn't teach you that you shouldn't feel tension before an important action. It teaches that tension, thought, and action are the same event, and that trying to separate one from the other is what creates conflict. The warrior with Kokoro. It's not about acting despite the nervousness. It's about acting with the nervousness, because nervousness and readiness to act are the same energy. What changes isn't the energy, it's the relationship you have with it. Gabriel spent weeks grappling with this understanding before he was able to describe it in words that made sense to an outsider, and then came the presentation. Chapter 6. The moment that doesn't appear in the highlights. Here we understand that the real transformation isn't dramatic. It's so subtle you almost don't notice it, until you realize you can't help but notice it. The second major presentation to investors came 8 months after the first. It wasn't the same group, a different, smaller one based in Chicago, less capital available. But for Gabriel, the objective magnitude of the opportunity had ceased to be the relevant point. What he wanted to know was different. Had the pattern changed? On the morning of the presentation, he woke up at 5 o'clock and recognized that the state he woke up in was different. There was tension. The tension was there. He didn't suppress it. He did what he had practiced for months. He sat there with the question of shi no Meisō. If today were my last day, what would I be avoiding? The answer was clear and immediate, nothing to do with the presentation. There was a link to his father that he had postponed, a decision about hiring an employee that needed to be made. Nothing related to what was in front of him. This mattered, because the voice in the elevator he had understood wasn't about the presentation. It was about everything that remained unresolved beneath the surface, and which the brain, in moments of maximum pressure, brought to the surface as noise. When there is nothing significant to avoid, the voice loses its fuel. He got into the elevator of the investors' building and waited. The voice didn't come, not with the same force. There was tension, yes. There was an increased heart rate, yes. But there was no narrative. There was no monologue that transformed tension into evidence of imminent failure. Kokoro in action, the presence of feeling without the history that normally accompanies it. He opened the presentation. He maintained Zanshin, the present attention between one block and another, without the micro-interruption of evaluating the past while the present was happening. When a difficult question arose, he answered with what he knew, and when he didn't know, he said he didn't know, without this creating the internal spiral of before. 45 minutes later, the presentation was over. One of the investors said, "You seemed completely at ease here." Gabriel considered replying that he wasn't completely at ease, that there was tension, that his heart had raced, that the voice had tried to enter, and he had recognized the attempt without dissolving into it. But he simply said, "Thank you," because the difference between this performance and the previous one wasn't that he had become a fearless person. It was that he had become a person who didn't lie to himself about what he was feeling and who, therefore, didn't need to expend energy fighting his own internal experience while trying to act in the external world. The investors moved on to the next phase of the process. Gabriel didn't celebrate. Why Zanshin? The consciousness that remains was the same before, during, and after. The same quality of presence. The same state of unfocused attention. He went home, called his father, and had the conversation he had been putting off for months. What Gabriel experienced in the second presentation has a name in modern neuroscience. Harvard psychologist and researcher Daniel Siegel describes it as neural integration, the pure state in which different brain regions that normally operate in conflict during high pressure situations begin to operate in coordination. Not silence, coordination. Siegel identified that this state is not produced by emotional suppression, nor by intensified rational analysis. It is produced by what he calls full presence with what is happening, including what is happening internally. Sports performance researcher Michael Gervais, who works with Olympic athletes and NFL teams, describes the same phenomenon from a different perspective. The athletes who perform best under pressure are not those who feel less pressure before competition. They are the ones who have developed a different relationship with what they feel, who interpret physiological activation not as a sign of threat, but as a sign of readiness. Gervais and Tsunetomo arrived at the same conclusion by completely different paths. separated by 3 centuries and 2 oceans. Here's what Gabriel discovered that no one had explicitly said. Shino Meisō, Zanshin and Kokoro. These are not 3 separate practices. These are 3 angles of the same understanding. Shino Meisō cleanses the past. It removes the accumulated evasions that fuel the voice. Zanshin, clear the future. Eliminate the anxious anticipation that paralyzes action. Kokoro, dissolve the separation between the two, between what you think and what you feel, between the warrior you believe you should be and the human being you are. And what remains when the 3 operate together is not a state of artificial trust. It's something simpler and more solid. It's someone who finally stops wasting energy fighting against themselves, and that, for the first time, he has access to the totality of what he is, unfiltered, unsuppressed, without the constant narration of a brain trying to protect him from a threat that exists only in the model he himself constructed. The samurai called this being fully prepared before going into combat. Neuroscience calls it integration. Gabriel calls it the only thing that really changed everything.